Hello, hello. My British author is Robert Burns, and he's actually not British. He is Scottish, and he was born in the early 1700s. So there weren't many pictures of him, but there were paintings. This guy is so famous in Scotland that they actually named him Scotland's greatest poet of all time. Anyways, let's take a look at why. Robert Burns has his famous works. One of them is called Old Lang Syne, which means old long ago. Burns didn't write in traditional English, by the way. He wrote in Scottish vernacular, meaning the dialect of Scottish people. This song is typically played on New Year's Eve to wish the previous year goodbye, but to look forward to a new year.
Be forgot and never brought to mind. Should old acquaintance be forgot and days of old lang syne? For old lang syne, dear, for old lang syne, we'll take a cup o' kindness yet for days of old lang syne.
Another work of Robert Burns is an ode or a poem called A Red, Red Rose. Originally, it was a dedication to an unnamed lover, but it became so famous that it made it into a book of traditional Scottish melodies. By the way, if you've ever watched the movie Maid of Honor with Patrick Dempsey, the Scottish guy in the movie sings this to his girlfriend. Just some movie trivia.
Oh, what a panic's in thy breasty. Thou needna start awa sae hasty wi' bicker and brattle. I would be laith to rin and chase thee wi' murder and battle. I'm truly sorry man's dominion has broken nature's social union, and justifies that ill opinion which makes thee startle at me, thy poor earth-born companion and fellow mortal.
Next, we're going to be looking at another poem that Robert Burns wrote. It's called Tam O'Shanter. It is an epic poem, and an epic is one that usually has a journey, and this journey is about a guy that stayed too long at a bar, or a pub in that case. Tam O'Shanter got drunk enough to start hallucinating things. So, this journey that Robert Burns writes about is him hallucinating enough to see warlocks and witches dancing, etc. It's a lot of imagery in a poem. So this next piece of work from Burns is called Address to a Haggis. It's actually a funny poem from him. It is an ode to a special dish called a haggis, which is a stuffed veal stomach. Might it have been his favorite food? Who knows? Every 25th of January, the Scottish celebrate Burns Night, which is Robert Burns' feast day on January 25th. Yes, he's really respected in Scotland, so he actually does have a feast day. This haggis is served, but first, an honorary member of the table has to dramatically recite his poem. So that's kind of interesting. So, some key facts about Robert. His father had an E in Burns in the last name, but when he died, Robert had his whole family exclude the E, and nobody really knows why. Also, Robert was actually going to work in a plantation in Jamaica, but he didn't see a future in it because he was very self-doubtful in Scotland. He would write, but he wasn't well known, and it wasn't until he finally published his first book that he decided to stay in Scotland and just quit on the whole idea of Jamaica. And that's when he decided to go to university and make something of himself as a writer after all this time. But after all his hard work, he is no doubt Scotland's greatest poet, and he's actually so famous that he has fan clubs all over the world like charters that just celebrate his works, and they read out loud, and they're just very devout to him. So, about his family, Robert is the eldest son to William Burns, who was a hardworking farmer. This influenced Robert a ton, actually, because he saw the authentic and hardworking way of life. So, he was also alive during the French Revolution and was in favor of reform. He was in favor of the poor gaining equality amongst the rich. And he was very opposed to the elite and the rich in overpowering and overruling. So he encouraged the poor to fight for their rights. He would speak a lot about it in his poems, and it was a very highlighted theme among his works. And Robert had about 12 kids. That's a lot. 12 kids with 4 women. But sadly, he died on the birth of his last son. And that's a bit morbid of a birthday, isn't it? On the other hand, our buddy Robert was born, lived, and worked on a farm. So when he wrote, he really captured the essence of rural and agricultural matters. But most of all, he was really influenced by the true people of Scotland, who were the workers and the farmers and basically the labor people, the ones who actually had the most influence in his life from the start. Sadly, Robert Burns was never fully wealthy, but I think he chose to live as one among his people, and I think that would bring enough happiness to a person to be accepted and to be loved amongst those who respect you. And he was and still is super famous, however, and he is admired by the Scottish and his really famous writings. There you could see a Scot dramatically reciting the address to the haggis at Burns' supper, and he looks very into it.
Still shine like the morning dew. He rode Old Lang Syne. Love is like a red, red rose. Mary of a girl and lots of other bonny prose.
As said before, Robert Burns' influences came from a traditional way of life, the bourgeoisie, or the poor, versus the capitalists, because since he lived in a time of revolutions, it was a theme that was mostly highlighted in his life, the ongoing battle between the poor and the rich. And during his life, he experienced a lot of revolutions during the war, like the American Revolution versus the British and the Americans, and the French versus the poor. And he also finds agriculture to be another influence, and social class, how people should behave according to their class, and the whole social caste. And love and women. He really loved his women. In a nutshell, he was a hard worker who found release in poetry, drinking, women, and politics. These are some recognizable quotes from his works, including, "Oh, my love is like a red, red rose. Should old acquaintance be forgot?" You can hear that on New Year's Eve. "For Auld Lang Syne," and "Let us do or die."
A Red, Red Rose by Robert Burns. Oh, my love's like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my love's like the melody that's sweetly played in tune. As fair art thou, my bonny lass, so deep in love am I, and I will love thee still, my dear, till the seas gang dry, my dear. and the rocks melt with the sun, I will love thee still, my dear, while the sands of life shall run. And fare thee well, my only love, and fare thee well a while. And I will come again, my love, though it were 10,000 mile.
I chose to interpret A Red Red Rose by Robert, and basically it is a poem about deep love and admiration to a woman, in this case an anonymous woman because he doesn't name her in the poem. In the first stanza, he compares her to a rose, saying how lovely she is, how she's so beautiful, that she's compared to the epitome of all romantic flowers. But later in the poem, he says that he promises to love her forever, or at least until the ocean dries up. And by the end, it seems as if he's saying a farewell until the two shall be reunited again. So all in all, it's a romantic poem, but it does have its questionable thoughts about it. So why and how does this relate to the romantic time period? I guess that's a $1,000,000 question. Well, to start, romantic writers were all the rage about celebrating the individual and light and harmony in nature and whatnot. Therefore, this poem includes nature by talking about a rose and the ocean and the land. It also uses the season and the times of the year, like June, to interpret the poem. It's all about beautiful imagery. Robert also uses this poem to express himself freely. You know, like in romantic time period, it was all about the human being able to express himself as an individual, no matter what. And in this poem, he proclaims his love for this chick to the world. Also, some romantic literary devices that come along with this poem are metaphoric comparisons, repetition, and rhyming. And that was also more notable in romantic literature. And most authors in this time period use these literary devices in their writings.